Hello and welcome to the latest edition of our Sustainability Perspectives podcast, where we discuss the sustainability challenges the industry faces with a range of different packaging experts. My name is Elisabeth Skura, and today we're going to discuss trends in the beverage industry related to recyclability, with a focus on plastic waste, and we'll dive deeper into the role adhesives play and the key role they play in recycling, enabling recyclability and the dematerialization of packaging. With me to do this today, I'm very pleased to welcome Elizabeth Starp to the podcast, who is Global Packaging Sustainability Manager at HP Fuller. So, welcome, Elizabeth. It's great to have you on the podcast today. And thank you for coming back. We've done a few podcasts with you already. Always a pleasure.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I can't wait to delve into our questions.
So obviously many, or if not all of our listeners, I'm sure will be aware that the European Parliament has adopted the PPWR, the Packaging and Packaging Waste Regulation, and it is expected to enter into force in 2025. And one of the most used packaging materials for drinks are PET bottles, and the new regulations obviously include recycled PET mandates that will come into effect starting 2030. And I wanted to start a conversation today by asking you, Elizabeth, what does this mean specifically for the beverage industry?
Yeah, well, everybody has been waiting with bated breath to really see whether the PPWR really would be adopted. I think there was a little bit of speculation in the final weeks there in November. And now it has been adopted and will be going forward. And then with the recycled content mandate starting 2030, that of course means a great change for their market. There have been many brands that have been adopting certain percentages of recycled PET into their bottle packaging so far, but many have had very low percentages or been waiting, also from a cost perspective, of course. And the mandates for recycled content, in my opinion, are particularly important for the secondary market demand, really giving that market to the recyclers so that they know that they are going to be able to sell the recycled material, because that really has been very challenging for them. And over the past few years, we have seen a few recycling companies come under some financial duress, even having to close up shop, which of course is very counterintuitive when we're thinking of this legislation. And then when we're looking at recycled PET, the highest possible quality from a color perspective, transparency, and then of course, from a cleanliness, from a purity point of view is very important. And that of course is where adhesive specifications come into play, making sure that the adhesives and the labels come off as best as possible and leave the PET to be clean and then recycled to then produce new bottles. The adhesives and labels can be taken off with friction, can be washed off in a caustic solution. And that's then really where the specification of the adhesive is very important, because the adhesive itself is not recycled today, but really facilitates the recycling and high yields of the PET. So really that secondary market, having that market demand and that economic security for the recyclers is really key, and a key part of the PPWR, in my opinion.
I wanted to ask you, looking beyond PET bottles and recycling, which is obviously a well-established process and a really well-running system, beverage producers also need to look at further options to improve their packaging. And the term dematerialization comes to mind here. And the PPWR also specifically talks about packaging minimization. And I wanted to get your take here. What role can adhesives play in this context?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. When we're thinking of the term packaging minimization, the PPWR talks really specifically about reducing the pack size that the consumer sees on the supermarket shelf. The regulation looks in detail at weight and volume limits, wall thickness, and also the empty space within a package. So all the efforts to lightweight and reduce material usage are really brought to a forefront here, and that's really paramount. And much work has already been done in the past few years. And I'd argue that a lot of packaging sizes and packaging design is already very optimized in this respect. And it's going to be very challenging for various producers as there's basically a new starting line drawn with the PPWR. And for those companies who have been putting a lot of effort and a lot of work into this optimization for the past decade or so, this is going to be particularly challenging. And so they need to be all the more creative. And that's really where adhesives can support packaging design and new designs. At H.B. Fuller, we work very frequently with customers in innovation design thinking sessions where we try to come up with new solutions, rethink and redesign the package, the delivery form, in order to have a solution that is more practical and more has a lot easier handling throughout the logistics supply chain, and then also has a different design on the shelf. And this is, of course, more of a medium long-term solution and not so much as a quick fix because you're looking at each packaging in detail. And you also mentioned dematerialization. And I think overall, we still do see examples of some over packaging where there's an additional layer that might not be that necessary. And here, a lot of packaging materials are in particularly used in transport packaging. So the logistics packaging that is needed from the production site to the distribution center or the supermarket, because the producers want to avoid breakages, because those are very expensive, because typically an entire pallet will be returned to the producer rather than only taking out the couple of bottles or containers that have been broken. And if we think in particular in the beverage industry, as liquids are being transported, the individual containers are fairly heavy. And therefore, the sort of the conclusion could be, okay, I need extra packaging material in order to keep the items safe and not have them break en route. And so here we do see quite a bit of over packaging in the industry overall. A lot of packaging materials are used for transportation to make sure that everything arrives in one piece, unscratched, unbroken, etc. But much of these packaging materials that are used in transportation do have alternatives. And here, hot melt or water-based adhesives can be used to create a non-skid surface on a layer of boxes or bags, for example, for the next layer. That then also facilitates the use in automated warehouses. And then alternatively, you can also use a stronger bonding adhesive so that you're effectively gluing layers of back boxes to one another. And at H.B. Fuller, we also have a similar solution so that you can glue PET bottle 6-packs to one another, really giving that inherent pallet stability, being able to reduce slip sheets and reduce the amount of shrink wrap that is used on the pallet, so that the shrink wrap is essentially keeping your products clean and dust-free, but is not needed so much for the overall pallet stability. So there are many opportunities there, but it does take quite a bit of work to look at pallet configurations in detail, how that can be changed, etc. Again, not something that you do overnight. More thought and planning has to go into those changes.
That makes a lot of sense. And you make some really good points here because I get the feeling that transport packaging is not talked about so much. And we talk more about the product packaging that the consumers take home and then use and discard it and hopefully recycle it as well. Um, on that note, I wanted to ask you, lately we've seen new packaging designs for multi-packs, alternatives to shrink-wrapped 6-packs, for example. And I assume that adhesives can be a part of the solution here too. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And I have to say that multi-pack bundling is one of my favorite topics. At H.B. Fuller, we've been engaged in various projects working with industry partners in order to design new solutions here. And truth be told, replacing plastic shrink wrap is really challenging because plastic shrink wrap is a tremendously versatile material. It's very strong and it is very cheap. So for beverage manufacturers to use it, it is just so simple to put a 6-pack through a shrinking tunnel, and then you have a very nicely packed 6-pack. However, at the same time, we can't necessarily be sure that across the entire EU and UK, these shrink wraps are actually recycled. I think of the best case there, they're probably incinerated. And going through the supermarkets lately and also bidding at various trade shows, you can see some very creative designs that bring 6-packs together that involve board, whether that's basically a partial covering of a 6-packs where then the PET bottles or aluminum containers are somehow fixated in the board or glued to the board, or an entire encasing, so an entire box for aluminum cans, for example. So there are really quite a few variations on the market now that really give the brands a choice to portray that more sustainable image on the shelf for the consumer, because it is known that consumers in that split second of taking the decision which product to buy, they do look at the packaging, and their perceived sustainability association with that packaging does play a role in their purchasing decision in that split second. But coming back to the topic of dematerialization, we always need to compare the amount of packaging material that we are actually using versus the packaging material that was used previously. And coming back to shrink wrap, it's very light in comparison to cardboard. And again, because beverages are heavy, you do need sturdy packaging materials that keep it all together. And therefore, those tend to be thicker and heavier. And here, adhesives do offer various options to reduce the overall amount of board that is used, as the adhesives can attach the containers either to the board or to each other. And here again, with the multi-packs, we're going to have to see how the PPWR plays out, because it does mention multi-packs specifically in Annex 5 as a packaging type that should no longer be used. It's listed as one of the packaging formats that has restrictions on use, but with the added sentence that it excludes group packaging that is necessary to facilitate handling. And here, I think you can argue that just about any group packaging is necessary to facilitate handling, if handling is also transportation. So we're going to have to see how that all plays out and how the legislation ends up being interpreted here.
Yeah, I think that will be very interesting to see. And yeah, to wrap up this conversation, building on what you just said with the PPWR now in its final stages of approval, how do you see it address the challenges, the sustainability challenges that packaging industry faces, and how hopeful are you that some of the more ambitious targets will be achieved and that we're moving in the right direction?
Well, I think generally we need to stay positive, although sometimes it is a little bit difficult, I'll be very honest, to remain positive if you're looking at sort of global developments overall. But I think the PPWR really does remain a very positive approach for producers in the EU, because we have an EU level playing field, and producers that are putting products and packaging into the market have to adhere to these overall rules. They're obviously still implementing acts that are missing with regards to recycling design guidelines and how those are going to be tested and assessed, and therefore what type of packaging is deemed recyclable and others not, and therefore cannot be put on the market any longer after 2030 and 2035, when recyclability at scale kicks in, which now has been reduced to 55%, down from 75%. So there's still various parts that are missing, but I think overall the trend is very positive, having a level playing field across the EU, really pushing for recycled content so that recycling infrastructure is put into place and continues to develop with state of the art recycling processes, and then having that secondary market so that producers can use and will be forced to be using recycled content in their packaging. So I think that then also fulfills the consumer's expectations that continue to be very high when regarding packaging and brands and the sustainability promises that brands are making. So overall, I do think we ought to stay positive. There's still parts that need to be worked out, but I think overall it's going in the right direction.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. I think that's a great note to end this podcast on. Yeah, let's stay positive and hope that despite plenty of challenges, both old and new, we will continue to move in the right direction with packaging sustainability and sustainability in general, also in the new year. Thanks very much, Elizabeth, for being on the podcast with me today. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure's been all mine. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, like I always say, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. We have a new episode coming out roughly about once a week. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the latest episodes. Thanks very much.